Excuse my super messy palette. I'm working on so many things. Um, I think to get started, I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit of detail on her face. I um, I do like to start that way. I feel like the piece just has a little bit of life when you start on the face and set a little bit in, at least just a first look. So I'm just going to mix up a little bit of an orange. I need to set out more of my Hansa Yellow Opaque. It's dried out. I want just a little bit of an orange. I want it to lean a little bit to the yellow side. So I've got a little bit of the Naphthol red, a little bit of quinacridone magenta, and some of the cad yellow. That's pretty small, so I'm just going to tap it in just loosely. I think I'll grab a smaller brush and come back in with a little bit of the black outline. Probably should have zoomed in a little bit more on the camera for you to see it. And then I'm going to dot in just a little bit of the pupil. This is a brand new brush and it already has a stray hair. Those lines are going to make her look just a little bit angry to start. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and dot in just a little catch light. Um, I'll probably rework this eye a little bit, but anything to help us get started. Let's go ahead and do a little bit on her beak. I'm going to bring over, I do have some black out on my palette, and you can probably see in my palette camera, I do have the humidifier working on my palette. It's crazy how dry the air is. So I'm just mixing up a little bit of a gray. I still had some yellow on my brush from before, and that's okay. Dip into a little bit of the white. I forgot to talk about what I've done with my substrate here. This is a 10 by 10, and I did coat it with GAC 100 on the front and the back. I think I've mentioned this before, but I really am trying to do the back at the same time just to keep myself from having to come back in and play catch up later and get a bunch of backs ready. Dip back into a little bit of the black to darken some edges here. And then back into the white again. Try not to have too much paint on my brush there. I think that that's good for a start. I'll probably come back in and add a few more highlights on it after it dries a little bit, but that gives us a good start. Let's go ahead and work on the comb and the wattle. We still have some of that orange out, so that might help us a little bit. I'm going to make a red with the quinacridone magenta and the naphthol red. I can see I'm going to have a palette reset coming. I should have done that before I started painting. I just got so excited to start painting. So I've got a pink. I've just pulled in a little bit of titanium white to mix a pink to the side. A little bit more quinacridone magenta and phthalo blue to darken for some darker areas. Just kind of building up a little bit of a few values over here for me to work with. I've decided that one of the things that I don't like about the round brushes is that I love to brush mix, and round brushes are just not as easy as the filberts for brush mixing. On the chickens, the wattle has a little bit of a kind of a cupped shape. It kind of rounds. So I'll be working a little bit to try to give some of the feel of that. The air is so dry that even the brush gets starts to feel like it's tacking up some. Dip into some of this pink that I made. I'm gonna use a little bit of this pink to bring this wattle up and make it um, attached to the beak just a little bit more. And then while we're here, let's go ahead and do this back wattle, or the wattle that's on the other side of her face. I finished talking about what I did with this background. I need to focus a little bit. I'm so scattered lately. There's so many things I want to do. Um, so for the background, it is a 10 by 10 cradled wood panel, and the panel itself is available at Shelly Parker Art. So you can get the panel engraved with the design. I know it's a little bit hard to see. I've been fighting also with the camera today. I wish I could get it to show you. Um, the design is engraved on the wood panel, even though it's very difficult for you to see it. And then I covered the front and the back with GAC 100, a couple of coats just till I had a nice seal on the wood substrate. And then I came in with white gesso and I did a couple of coats of white gesso. And since I'm going to do something a little bit different with this piece and leave the background mostly white, I wanted to really take my time with the background and make sure that I got um, a really good, even coverage. And I did go ahead and really spend some time filling in some of the engrave lines because that will make it just easier as I go along. It'll make those engrave lines go away a little bit where I can still see them as far as painting, but I won't be fighting them as much with later, with just trying to cover them. So, like I said, the panel is available at shellyparkerart.com. It's really, it's really a really cool little tool for artists, I think, to be able to just get the wood panel. It's already ready to go. Your design is already on it, and you can just get started painting. So I'm just going to paint in this wattle. I'm going to vary the colors a little bit and just get the basic shapes in, just kind of thinking about where the shadows would naturally be. It will darken a little bit as it comes closer to her face. I do have to say, leaving the background white makes it a little bit more fussy at this point because, um, I don't have any background to fix it. So I'm just going to really take my time and be careful up here with these shapes that are right against that white background. I do have the cups of extender medium and airbrush medium out, and I'm really trying to make myself remember pretty often to dip into that extender medium to try to keep my brush from getting too gummed up, to try to keep my paint mixes going a little bit. I like the airbrush medium. Um, I really do prefer it over water. If water works great for you, then definitely use that. That's perfectly fine. I just find for the way that I paint, the airbrush medium just works better for me. This is a little bit of a departure from how I ordinarily paint. We often talk about, um, not getting in the weeds too quickly with detail, but um, this little wattle has lots of different variations, different things going on. I think that's Higgins dreaming. So we can start to capture some of them right away that won't necessarily completely be done with this first run through, but it'll be close. Grab just a little bit more of a titanium white there. I might have to let this part dry a little bit so that some of these highlights really show up. And let's see. I think while I have this shadow color here, I'll go ahead and just come in with a couple of little darker areas up here. We can't get that. Yeah. Let me see if I can zoom in on it a little bit for you. I'll have to change the autofocus. There, you can kind of see it a little bit closer. It's pretty loose, but it doesn't need much more there, really. Um, Again, while I have this dark color, I'm going to go ahead and fill in a little bit here. It's actually a little darker than I even want it to be, I think. I'll dip into a little bit more of the quinacridone just to brighten it a little bit. And then I'll come into the red and start to put in a little bit of the reds that are on her face. She has a little bit of red that comes back on the back side of her eye right here. And then it sort of wraps around this ear shape that's on her face here. Get a little bit of pink just to give some variations in there. That looks good enough for that first look. I'm going to have to be very careful with the background on this piece, not to splash it or get my hands in it. Of course, we can always, you can always paint over it again with gesso, but it's just nicer to not have to do that. I have a little angle brush in my water here that I was using earlier this morning, so I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to grab some burnt sienna, maybe a little bit of yellow, and I think I'm going to start off her neck area and her head by just blocking in a little bit of this color. I think it will help us later as we start to build some of the feathers. She has kind of a complicated feather pattern. Um, so I want to capture some of that really pretty feathering, particularly up here against her her face where we really want the focal point to be. So I'm just going to lay down just a loose layer of this color. And then on the on the tracer that comes with this class, I have a few more feather details sketched in for you. And I think that once this dries, I think I will go ahead and use that tracer and put a little bit of the chalk pastel on the back of it just to draw in some of these feathers. You could certainly eye it if you want to. I think that just using the tracer will, it'll just make it a little faster. I won't have to be, guessing how I want that spacing to be. I'm gonna try not to get into the red too much. It might still be wet. That's kind of Murphy's Law, right? What you want to dry doesn't, and what you don't want to dry does. There's a jillion different ways to go about this, and some schools of thought would maybe tell you, work from the back forward because of the way that the feathers overlap. Um, for this first blocking in, it really doesn't matter as much. I like to just paint um, what feels more natural to me. What does my eye need to see in order to feel like, I kind of have an idea of where the painting is going? I hope that that made sense. I just grabbed a different brush so that I could come in and get a little bit of this brown around her top part of her head. And her little ear here is going to be a lighter kind of buff color. So I'll go ahead and put a little bit of that color there. I think I still have some purple on my palette from another painting I was working on this morning. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that and a little bit of the titanium white. I can't remember what this little part of their face is called. I think I've usually called it an earlobe, but I have chickens and I could be wrong. I wish the camera was capturing that a little bit better. That's a better look. That kind of gives you an idea. So it's just very loose. It again, just the first look, and really the layers help so much. Particularly with a piece like this, we're going to really be building lots and lots of layers. So I'm trying to think. I think that I will take a little break, let this dry. I might go ahead while I'm here and just loosely just loosely wash some of these other areas that are going to have the sienna color behind it. You can see that my paintbrush was a little bit, maybe you can see, let me zoom out again. There we go. You can see that my paintbrush was dirty, and so some of that purple is coming through. That's fine, and I kind of actually like it. I might pick up even more. The purple with the burnt sienna is sort of graying it, and this area of her is going to gray quite a bit. Might dip into just a little bit of black to also gray a little bit. And since this is just just a sort of a ground that we're setting in, I'm really lightening the paint by thinning it out. So for this, since we don't care about it drying, we can just use the airbrush medium. And I am thinking about the direction of the feathers. The engrave lines will help here. It also kind of helps us to be able to see some of the sections as we start to work on some of the sections of her body. In that little fast forward section, I ended up going a little bit further than I originally planned to. You can break yours into smaller sections if that feels more comfortable, but I know that this section is going to be more gray. So I shifted that wash to be more of a gray here. I know it'll be more gray up here on the back. And then I let it warm up to more of a burnt sienna in other places. At this point, I'm gonna let mine dry. I could go ahead and start to set in the tail, but again, I want to keep this background nice, and I worry that if I try to work on this tail, I'm going to get my fingers into everything else. So I'm going to take a break from here. I did want to point out a couple of things. Of course, you could use a larger brush than I just used. I had that brush out, and I know I'm getting ready to take a break, so I didn't change to a larger brush, but a larger brush would have made that go a little bit more quickly. Even though I'm sort of following the feather direction, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't leaving any um, ridges of paint. So I was trying to keep that in mind just because a ridge can be something that we have to fight with a little bit later. So trying not to have ridges at this stage is nice. So I'll take a break from here, let this dry. When we come back, we will trace in some of those feathers up here. Again, just it's a shortcut, just will make it a little bit easier for us. Um, and once we kind of get the value blocked in on the darker feathers on her neck, Then I think I'll start to probably work from the tail forward, just so that any new sections that we do, the feathers overlap. Um, in the engraved part of this design and in the tracer, there is some ground. You can just barely see it here at the bottom. A little bit of ground hinted. For this piece, as I paint it, I'm going to do a very loose watercolory. I don't mean actually watercolor. I mean, I'm going to have my acrylic paints behave a little bit more like watercolors and just make some very loose weeds and grasses around her to sort of settle her into this scene a little bit better. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what I'm thinking about at this stage. We will be back when this is all dry. Our wash that we did is dry, so I've come back down and printed the tracer and then scribbled some gray chalk pastel on the back, just where I wanted to come back in and give myself a little bit of an idea of where some of that feathering pattern is. This tracer, gosh, let me see if I can fix the screen again. Hang on. I don't know if that's any better or not. We're gonna try it. Um, so I put the chalk pastel on the back. It's hard to talk when you're painting, right? Um, I came back in with a pencil and just went over some of those lines. It'll just give me just a little help. This tracer is on an 8.5 by 11. So after I printed it off, I just trimmed off the top to match the line that is the top of the piece. And then when I set it down on here, it's about 3/4 of an inch from both sides, but it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just, again, it's just a little help. So I'm going to go ahead and start to do just a little bit of the black feathering, just to begin to build those layers. So I'm going to start with, I think, just a little filbert, and I'm just going to come in and do some of the centers of these feathers and begin to lay some of these darks in. I think that's pretty good for this little bit of an underpainting. I kept it pretty loose. These aren't all of the darks that will be here, but it does kind of give us a little bit of a roadmap. Um, I did carry some lighter grays through some of the other areas that you could see on that fast forward. So she looks a little like a leopard right now, but all just part of the process. I think that now I will go ahead and set in her tail now that this is dried enough that I'm not so worried about getting my fingers in it. I actually, during that little clip, wanted to start doing the legs, but again, I'm trying to make myself be somewhat methodical because of how much white space is around this piece. So I think that what I'm going to do is maybe I started um, a little light blue down here. I'm going to add a little bit of purple to it too, or a little bit of quinacridone magenta to make it purple. I think that what I'll do is just start to pick out some of the edges of these feathers. This will just give us something to work the black into. So there's a feather edge there, a feather edge here. And then I'll pick up some black and start to paint into those. I do have a little reference picture on my iPad just to the left of the screen here, which helps. It's just a little bit closer than my monitor so I can just see a little bit easier. I'm going to pull a little bit of titanium white over to start a little bit of a gray area on my palette that I can pick up here and there. Pick up a little bit more of that blue. You see, I'm not washing the brush yet. I'm just letting all of the colors work on my brush. Later, as I get to the end where I want to put in some of um, the more bright blues, then I'll be sure to wash my brush. Now I'll pick up some more black and go in and set in just a few more of the darkest areas of her tail. Seems like I'm having to reach way over there to get to the black on the other side of my palette. Whenever you can, try to make it so that you're not having to reach too much. It just wears you out pretty quickly. Starts to hurt your back. It's kind of a bummer to get to the age where I have to be very careful the way that I sit, otherwise my back starts to hurt. And through that block in that I did here, I was really using the filbert right on its angle, just like you're seeing me do here. I just, every time I make myself use other brushes, I always come back to the filberts because just for my hand and the way that I paint, I just get better results from the filbert. But as you are practicing your paintings, um, try other things. If something isn't working, change your brush. I got most of the paint out of my brush. I'm just going to come back in and touch along some of those lines in between just to make sure that I've got everything covered with paint. And then I'll be able to come back in and do a few more of the highlights that I want to put in here. So titanium white, some phthalo. You can purple it a little bit if you want. I think I'll lighten up a couple of areas. Yeah, I really like how that looks. That looks nice. At this point, I'm going to call the tail done. for now. Once it's dry, if I have anything else where I feel like some white is showing through, it'll be really easy to come back in and just put a little wash of black in there to fill that in. But I really like how that's looking. I think I'm just going to go ahead and begin to move forward so that all of the feathers that lay over the next layer can do that overlap. So in this section, I'm going to be using um, a burnt umber quite a bit. I have Van Dyke Brown out on my palette. Again, the Van Dyke Brown is right here. And basically I have it out just because I'm almost out of burnt umber. And I'm just looking over at my paints to see what I've got over there. I'm almost out of burnt umber, and I was just trying to use up the Van Dyke Brown. So I think that what I'll do to start is mix up um, a bit of a burnt sienna color. I was wondering how. I was hoping it wasn't too set up over there. I'm going to pull in some yellow ochre, pull some Van Dyke Brown down here. And that's just going to give me just some different tones to work with. And then I'm just going to start building in those feathers. I'm trying to decide. I might want to darken this burnt sienna just a little bit with the Van Dyke Brown. So I'm going to actually put that on our color mix worksheet so I don't forget. Okay, I really like how that is looking. It really was just a process of going back and forth between that dark Van Dyke Brown, the lighter burnt sienna yellow ochre. Um, I may come back in and do just a little bit more feather detail, but I'm gonna wait until I can see how it all comes together. I think that I'll go ahead and work on this little saddle area, the back area. I find the brush that I want. These feathers are a little smoother, so I'm going to try to capture that. I will mention in that last fast forward section, I did come back in with a round and added in a few feather shafts. I don't want them to be everywhere, but those lines can really help build the shape of these feathers on her back. And think of these feathers on her back as a little bit of like a waterfall. So we really want them really draping down. Once this dries, I may come back in and gray some areas. I think graying will help it a little bit. It looks brighter on the camera than it does in person, but for right now, I really like how that looks. While I'm painting this, I will probably go ahead and paint her little fluffy butt. That's what chicken people call it, is the fluffy butt. But it's going to be somewhat the same colors. So while I have it working, I'll probably go ahead and paint there too. I really like how this is starting to build up. Um, it needs a little bit more, but it needs to dry a little bit in order for me to be able to make some of the lighter strokes on top. Um, Particularly down here, remember to take your brush strokes outside of the line of the engraver that the laser put. Or if you're doing the tracer, the same thing. We really want this to be really furry, really loose. So let some little wisps of feathers go off there. I think that what I'll do now, a couple of different things. I want to take some darks up into this section of feathers. So this little underneath of the wing. So her wing would be here, and kind of, if you think about it like a songbird, her flight feathers would be these longer feathers here. But these are a little bit fluffier. And so by taking some of the dark up into this area, I'll be able to bring some of those light feathers in. I hope that that makes sense. I don't feel like I'm, again, you get like art brain when you try to paint. Um, I'm going to work on that, and then we'll check in a minute. really think that that looks really good. Before I move on, I wanted to talk a little bit about negative painting here. Um, it's really one of the ways negative painting is a great way for us to um, show some of the edges of the feathers. So let's let's try right here. And you can do this also when it's dry, which would probably work a little bit better. I hope you can see if I come back in and add some dark along the edges of these feathers, it can bring back a little bit of a feathery shape to them. And it's just, it works really, really quickly and can add a lot of detail. So I hope that that just gives you a tip on a technique that you might use there. I think that I'll go ahead and just real quickly do some grays and yellow ochre, burnt sienna, just on this little part of her, the top of her leg. I did want to point out during that last fast forward that we just did, when I moved to this area, I did move to a larger um, filbert brush. I think that use the largest brush that you can. Use the largest brush you're comfortable with, because that will help you to stay pretty loose. And um, I found myself as I was painting, not just this area, but even this waterfall tail that she has, um, that as you start to paint in the shapes, your eye kind of starts to pick out some feathers that your brush strokes just made. So be watching for those things as you're painting, and let those things happen. Really use your artist's eye and allow yourself to see some of those feather shapes. So let's see. I think that I'm picking up um, a little bit of the Van Dyke brown mostly. I'm going to put this on this back leg. It's going to be a little bit darker back there. And then just touch into a little bit of the burnt sienna to bring a little bit of color in. It doesn't need much. And then for this front one, we can gray out some Van Dyke brown. Van Dyke brown makes a really great gray. It's funny because it makes a really great gray unless you're not wanting a gray. There are times where you're like trying to get a brown or something like that. And so if you're fighting it, if you're having trouble with your color turning to gray, it may be the Van Dyke brown that's catching up with you. So that was just a little bit of the grayed out Van Dyke brown, a little bit of the burnt sienna mixture that, remember, has a little bit of um, yellow ochre in it. My paints are just getting so gummy. See if I can grab a little bit more of the yellow ochre to try to bring in some paint that's workable. And now some lighter areas. This part of her leg kind of rounds, so I'm hinting at that with the brush strokes too. A little bit lighter. Gives you a little bit of an idea. I'll probably come back in and lighten it a little bit. I'm going to let that paint dry. And I think I'm going to go ahead and move into this area, which is going to be, again, a lot of the Van Dyke Brown, quite a bit of the burnt sienna. We'll do some little feather marks in here too. Okay, I've been painting for about an hour and 40 minutes after the break that I took, and I've been painting all day. So I'm just starting to feel a little bit tired, but I really like where this is going. Um, at the end of that little fast forward, I hope that you saw, let me grab a brush. I'm using for this section that I just painted, I have a size 4. I really like these Transin brushes. Um, I like brushes, but the Transin brushes are just a little bit thicker at the ferrule. They have just a little bit more hair, but it really worked to just, maybe I can show you here, just set the brush down and kind of pull the feather shapes. So really just using the shape of the brush and more confident strokes than you might think. There are so many values of color changes going on, And so it's really going to take a couple of different goes at it. That's what happens when you've painted all day. Um, you keep building the layers. For a piece like this, we're probably talking about 4 or 5 layers on some of these different areas. I feel like the tail is basically done. I feel like I need to darken up parts of this, but all of those colors underneath are really going to help me. I really like the way her little fluffy rear is going. Um, Again, probably just a couple of more highlights and that's probably done. So she's closer than you think at this point, I guess is what I want you to know. I will say this area got way away from me. I got too much paint, um, meaning that it was thick paint there, and so it was, I couldn't work with it anymore. And that's no problem. Again, all of those colors are going to help me. I just need to come back and do a little bit of refining there. I bring that up to you so that you'll know if you're working on an area and you feel like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. It's okay. Just walk away from it, let it dry, and come back. I think it will help you to work in sections sort of the way I did. So the tail, and then these waterfall feathers, her little fluffy area, these fluffy feathers, the wing, saddle, her really pretty breast up here, and all of the colors that we'll be able to build there. So we'll be able, once we get all of these sections done, we'll be able to come back in and refine some of this so that there's not such stark breaks in between each of these sections. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with the way that it's looking. It's when you look at a chicken and all the feathers, it looks really, really complicated. But just try as much as you can to simplify it and let the layers build. I did mix up during that section of the last fast forward, I did mix up a little bit of orange that I mixed in with my burnt sienna just to brighten the burnt sienna a little bit. Trying to think, I can't think that there's any other real brush color mixes that I didn't talk about before. So we'll leave it there for today, and I'll be back tomorrow to work more on her. I'm ready to continue with this pretty hen. I'm going to be using all of the same colors and pretty much the same techniques. So I'm going to probably just let the video run and let you watch me as I go. If there's anything I can think of that I need to pop in and talk about, I'll sure do that along the way. I just want to talk a little bit about a couple of the things I'm doing, a couple of the challenges that I'm facing. Um, the biggest thing I think at this point is how transparent some of the colors are. So I've had to add white to more of the mixtures than I wanted to, particularly back here where you see some of the yellows really standing out. Um, I will glaze those down with a little bit of burnt sienna once it dries, but and I think that you can see where I worked here, it's really just changing the values, letting some areas get darker, letting some areas get lighter. Some of the areas you'll have to add more white than you think to get the coverage that you want, but then come back over and glaze that bright burnt sienna color. It's very hard to get that burnt sienna down in some places. Um, but really just experiment with the brushes. Go back and forth, use some smaller brushes if you need to. You saw me lay in some little dark areas for little tips of the feathers that you can see in the reference photo. Um, you can just touch that in and then touch in the lighter color over it and just little flick strokes, a little bit like feathers. So she's very, very close here. I feel like this area is a little flat. Um, I'm looking at the reference picture, trying to decide how I want to do I think I'm just going to maybe warm this a little bit and just hint at some loose feather shapes. This area will be helped quite a bit when I come in and add some of those feather shafts. And when you add the feather shafts, it's really important to be looking at the reference picture to really see the direction. So these wing feathers, the direction of these sort of points down and back. We talked about the waterfall feathers yesterday, and then these feathers really become a little bit more horizontal. So more vertical toward the front, but as they move toward the wing, they become a little bit more straight toward her tail. So all of those little directions will really help us build her form. I can't think of anything else I want to talk about at this point. I'm just going to keep painting. You did see me come back in, add a few more darks around her face. Again, that's the real focal point. So I'm going to be spending lots of time in that area. And I'm going to refine this a little bit. Again, I want to bring those burnt siennas in here. So I may have to add some white lines, which will look a little scary and stark at first. I do want to do a couple more highlights along her little fluff back here, and of course her legs and her feet. So just keep building. Don't stop is really the thing with her. Um, and as you look at the reference picture, try to simplify it a little. I have um, gone away from the reference picture a little bit. Um, Particularly in this area. I've made this area a little grayer than it is on the reference photo, and I like it. I'm going to leave it. So I'm bringing that up at this point just so that you can um, really give yourself permission to change it, follow the basic structure of her, but be willing to change it. So I'm just going to let the film run. I'm just going to keep painting and really just try to relax and enjoy the layers. I don't think it's been very long in that little time lapse, but I was thinking about something, and so I wanted to share it. Remember, when you're trying to do some of these fine lines, like the little feather shafts that we talked about a second ago, use the extender medium or water. Don't use, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. use the airbrush medium or water. Don't use the extender. The extender isn't going to help you get those long, thin detail lines. So that's a just a little thing to remember. A lot of times you can have you can struggle a little bit with those detail lines. So it's usually because I haven't reminded myself to use the airbrush medium, not the extender medium. It's all in the chemistry of the paints, but um, yeah, the extender medium just doesn't work really well for adding some of those detail lines. Okay, I'm going to keep working on her. Okay, I've been painting for almost 2 hours this morning. Um, I really like it. I like some of the additions that I did here on these little wing feathers. Um, the Pyrrole Red, Hansa Yellow Opaque, and Burnt Sienna really are kind of a magic color for this piece. I'll probably come in once this dries and do one more swipe through. I want to darken these waterfall feathers a little bit in a couple of places, just loosely. I think that that will bring this together a little bit, and a little bit more work to do on her feathers here. I keep trying to tell myself, just be loose. Let it happen. Let the brush do its work. You saw me do a little bit more work around the face. Let me see if I can pull it up a little bit closer so you can see. Camera's trying to focus. I really like what's happening here. And again, that was one of the areas where I was really able to be quite loose. I did a little bit more darkening on the wattle. It might be done. It might be done. And I just need to spend a little bit of time with it. The earlobe needs to be lightened a little bit, this middle circle right here. But overall, I think that that gives you a really good base. At this point, now you just keep working it. You just keep going in and adding feathers, take some pictures of it to look at what it looks like, stand back from it because this piece is there's so much going on that it really does help to stand back. One last little thing. Remember that this leg is further back, so let that leg be more shadowed than this leg. These the legs were really just Van Dyke brown and titanium white made into a gray and varied and just really tapped in there very, very loosely. Um, if you don't have Van Dyke brown, remember you could use burnt umber, add a little bit of black that will um, tone it down a little bit more, gray it down a little bit more. I did a very loose tap in on the leaves around her feet. Um, this one and this one are engraved into the panel. The others were just little wispies that I added. So I made a green out of phthalo blue, Hansa yellow, opaque, a little bit of burnt sienna. You can put a little bit of quin magenta to tone it if you want, but then really thin it down. In this scenario, I did use the extender liquid because I wanted it to stay wet long enough that I could come back in and run a brush stroke along it again. So very watered down green. I put in a very thin blade of grass, wipe the brush out, dip it in airbrush medium, and then I just ran the brush along that edge again just to soften it. I did the very same thing with some browns. I don't know if you can, I mean, it's very, very light, and that's exactly what I wanted. So Hansa Yellow Opaque, Burnt Sienna, you could use a little bit of Van Dyke Brown. Same thing with just at the beginning of the class, I mentioned that I just wanted this to be sort of have a watercolor feel, and I think it really does. So put down a little bit of paint, pinch out your brush, run the brush along it to sort of scribble out the edge on the hints of ground that we have down here. Trying to think if that's all. I'll probably warm up her leg here just a little bit. But really what I'm seeing mostly is I want to darken this area, work on some of these really interesting contrast feathers on her neck, warm this up, and I think that I'm pretty much done. There are just a few little areas where some of the white is showing through from the initial gesso. You can see a little bit up here too. So I'll be working to pull those feathers over some of those areas, letting them be a little bit wispy. So I think that that's all for now. I'm going to go ahead and work on finishing it up, putting on the final details, and then I'll be back to show you the finished piece and close up this class, talk about any other little ideas that I have along the way. Our hen piece is all finished, and I am so in love with this piece. I've been working today to build this float frame. She's not attached, so I'm having to hold her in there and not perfectly spaced, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of an idea of what that's going to look like. I just thought that this float frame was perfect for her. Um, she's an interesting piece. I really love the white background. That is something that is quite different from what I ordinarily do. I love the watercolory look to the little bit of grass that is at her feet. Let me go ahead and hold up just the float frame itself. So it's not stained on the back yet, but I will be adding a video to the YouTube channel on how I built this. But basically, she just sits in this little opening, and then I will add screws from the back to hold her into this frame. Just a couple of closing ideas, closing thoughts for her. I do think if you're going to do a white background, it is important to think about how you're progressing through the piece. Like I talked about in the class, um, with the white background, I really concentrated on not getting my hands into any parts and messing up the pretty white background. Even today, I've been painting, so I'm hesitant to put my hands on it. Let me go ahead and turn off this light and see if that will help you to be able to see her a little bit better. Sorry, the camera is also a little bit in the way. Yeah, she's so pretty. A couple of things. I did struggle with her neck feathers a little bit, and you know, it really is one of those things. I look at it up close and I think, eh, I don't really love it. But when you stand back from it and get just the overall beauty of her, they're really fine. The thing that I wanted to point out is that because this area, even though this is a 10 by 10, her neck area is pretty small. So I found that it helped me to think about painting those feathers as painting like lines of dark and lines of the light, like the burnt sienna and the yellow ochre color. So rather than thinking about um, it's a dark feather with a light outline, if you'll just paint the straight lines and treat each of those colors as a separate line of paint rather than thinking about it as one feather. That was hard to explain. I hope that that made sense. Um, I went back in toward the end. I did warm up some of the feathers closer to her. Try to turn on a light again. I did warm up these feathers here. I liked how that little adjustment worked. I did go back in and darken some of the darks, darken some areas. So, as I always say in all of the classes, go back and forth until you have it the way that you want it. Negative painting into some of these feathers, like I talked about in the class, really did work really well. So keep that little trick in your bag of tricks to try. But she's a really beautiful piece. Be watching for the video about how to put together a float frame. This is my first time ever building a float frame, and I learned some things along the way. So that video will be coming to the channel soon. And I am still altering the classes that are up next because I have a show coming up in March. So the next membership class will be a giant 20 by 30 cow standing at a fence. Um, I have some big plans for her, so I can't wait to get started on her, hopefully in the coming week or so. So be watching for that class to come soon.